Time to walk you through assignment number 2. All right, here's where it starts. On Blackboard, on the assignment page, go through this list of 8 items. But this video is probably the absolute best way to actually go through all this, okay? So I'm going to be bouncing this video off of this list, but they really work together. I wouldn't just use one on its own. So step 1 is to be using Google Chrome. As you can see, I'm using it here on Mac. It also works very well on PC and on Linux and on any operating system you can imagine. The reason we want to use it is because it makes step number 2 a lot easier than it would on any other browser. I mean step 3 actually. So step 2 is to sign up for one of the texts. So click here, it'll take you to this spreadsheet. You can see, just put your name in any empty spot. You can see that things are starting to fill up pretty fast. But there's lots of the German and Swedish texts still have spots available. So just put your name in there. Don't delete anyone else's name. Also, this video now has a permanent record of people who are signed up right now. So if you delete someone's name, we will all know. Okay, so step 3, find the text you've selected, linked from this page, and see this video for details how to open and save it. All right, so this will teach you how to download it. Okay, the easiest way to download it, and we're all using Chrome now, okay? So this is why I want us all using Chrome. So let's say you are doing Chekhov's An Avenger. You would right-click on a PC or a Mac if you have a mouse attached, or on my computer I use a two-fingered click to bring up menus, or control click. So whether you're right-clicking, control clicking, two-fingered clicking, you want to see a menu that looks something like this. You'll see this Save Link As. This is the best way of saving and downloading the file onto your computer. So you click Save Link As, and it'll say Save Chekhov An Avenger. Where? I'm going to put it on my desktop just because that's the easiest place. You can put it anywhere you want, but if you are not sure where you want to put it, the desktop is a great place for it. So I'm going to save it. So now if I go to my desktop, put aside this lovely thing for a second, on my desktop you will see that it has properly downloaded Chekhov An Avenger. The other way, if for some reason that doesn't work, here's what you can do. Just click on it, it'll load up in Chrome, and then you can say Save Page As, and you can do the exact same process and click Save. You'll probably notice that when you open it in this view, you'll see like right here, this like A with a hat on it. You'll see some weird formatting. That should disappear once you open it in Sublime Text in the next step. Okay, so whether you did the right click or control click. Control click, I mean, like if you've never done this before, hold down the control key on your keyboard on a Mac and then click on it, and this menu will come up. So once you've done that step, you can now proceed to step 4. Read the story carefully, noting any narrative frames that may be present. Create a box diagram for your story, like the ones in the lecture slides for February 27th and March 1st. So in order to figure out, like this is by far the most important step of the assignment, and it's going to be the hardest. You have to read it and try to figure out where there are frames. So remind yourself, go to the slides of what the definition that we came up with for frame narrative. That's a narrative within a narrative, and then we defined a narrative. It's a story told by a narrator, and a story is an action or a series of events. I've come up with what I think is actually a really good secondary little test for whether you're in a frame narrative or not, and we'll get to that one in a second. Okay, so for the purposes of laying this all out for you, I cannot, sadly, I cannot really just like interpret one of the stories that's been given out. We've talked a lot about Turn of the Screw, but at the same time, Turn of the Screw is so complicated and so long that it's like a bad example in some ways. It's harder than the ones that you have to do. So I'm just going to grab one of the texts that that I did not assign you, one of the ones I decided seemed boring. There were some, as I mentioned, that I wasn't happy with for other reasons, but this one I just found kind of boring. Okay, so I'm in Sublime Text. This is the program that I want you using to do all your editing. So I downloaded it and installed it, and I put it into my applications, and I just double-clicked on it to get it open. So I'm in Sublime Text. I'm going to go open that file that I downloaded in step 3. So I'm going to my desktop, and so this opens the one that I downloaded. So if you're working on Chekhov's An Avenger, you should see something that looks exactly like this. As I mentioned, I'm not going to interpret that story because that would be stealing someone's work. So I'm going to open this one that I did not assign for you. So this story is a story about, there's like this evil guy who is kind of a Scrooge-like figure, but his problem is not that he's greedy, it's that he eats too much, and he's making himself very sick. So he goes to all these doctors and they tell him to stop eating, and it doesn't work. So instead, this clever doctor comes, instead of telling him he's sick and he needs to stop eating so much, he tells him that he's got like a demon monster worm inside his stomach, and that the only way to fend off the evil monster worm is to eat less and then to walk to his office. And anyway, it's a little trick that he plays on the guy, and it ends up working really well. So if I'm reading and interpreting this story, the thing that I have to ask myself is, there's like one point at which this might be a frame narrative, and it's the part that I'm highlighting right now. At one point, the doctor says to this guy, "Dear friend, you are in bad shape, but I can help you if you obey. You have an evil creature in your gut, a monster worm with 7 mouths. I must speak with this monster, and you must come to me, but you may neither drive nor ride. You must walk, or else you'll," etc. So he's giving this whole story about this evil devil monster. So I have to ask myself, is this just like a narrative? Is this just two people talking? Is this a dialogue, or is it a story? Is he telling a new story here? Is this a new narrative? Should I mark this up as a frame narrative? So in the language of the box diagrams that I'm asking you to create for this step, is it this box diagram? Is it just an A, or is that story that the doctor or I'm giving it away here. In fact, as you'll see in a second, I don't think it's a story, but is that the dialogue that the doctor says to the patient, does that count as a separate narrative within the big A-level narrative? So here's this trick that I've come up with. I think it works pretty well. And I just came up with this yesterday, so I didn't say it in class, but keep this one in mind. If you come to a point where you think the narrative might move to another level, where a frame might occur, imagine inserting right before that point the phrase, and then X, and X would be like the potential narrator of this next frame, and then X started telling a story. If that seems to fit, you should probably mark a new frame there. If it doesn't fit, it's probably not a new frame. So if I go back here to this point that I'm like, this is the point, right? This is the point where I think maybe there's a new frame. So if I imagine saying, and then the doctor started telling a story. Well, if I think about it that way, it doesn't really feel like a story, right? He's not relaying a series of events. He's just giving a bunch of advice. And yes, it's like made up advice, like you have an evil creature. It's fiction, but to me, it's not a story. It's just advice. And there's all kinds of there's all kinds of modes of dialogue. Dialogue can be just like an instruction. It could be advice. It can be a threat. Or it could be a story. And this one, I don't think it passes my and then X started telling a story test. Compare that with Turn of the Screw. Okay, so like that Douglas character starts telling a story around the fireside. You could easily imagine the narrator of the A level saying, and then Douglas started telling a story. It would fit perfectly. And then when he starts reading the governess's narrative, you can imagine him being like, all right, now the governess is going to tell us a story, and her story begins. And even within that, I mentioned there's this one point where the governess tells the events of the previous day. And there, I think you could also imagine the narrator saying, and then I began telling a long story to Mrs. Gross. So this test, I think, for me, it's probably the simplest way, but also refer to the definitions that you'll find in the slides and in the annotation guidelines in a second. Okay, so I've read it, I've done my box diagram. What I've decided for my box diagram, by the way, is that this is what this is. This is just an A level, because I cannot say, and then the doctor started telling a story. It just doesn't work. I'm just going to say it's a plain old one level A narrative, nothing more to it. So I have read it carefully. I've made my box diagram. I have noted that some stories don't have any framing, and I'm not looking for frames. I don't think they're there. I'm not going crazy about it. Okay, now the next step is to read the annotation guidelines. So these are the official annotation guidelines. They explain what XML tags are, that they have start and end markers. It lays out the end frame tag, the level attribute, and the nar attribute. I mean, this is all very much like the stuff we covered in lecture, but if you need a reminder or you weren't in lecture, you can read this. I think these sample annotations, not only is the narrative that I invented extremely great, they're also probably pretty clear in laying out how to do this. If you, for instance, you weren't in lecture, read through this and try to turn this into one of those box diagrams, right? Like try to figure out the way that these end frame tags with their start and end tags, how those connect to the boxes. So like this is the one I'm going to do for this assignment. I just think it's a text with only one narrative level, just an A level. So I'm going to start it with this end frame, level A, nar equals 1, and end it with the close end frame. That's all there is to it. But it's important that you, even if you were in lecture and you get all this stuff, read through these guidelines, because like scientifically, as an exercise, it's important that you have all read through this stuff. Okay, so that is step 5. So now open up the Sublime Text app, which I've already done on my computer. Open the text file that I downloaded in step 3, which I've already done, and insert my XML annotations. All right, here's a step I wanted to show you. This in video form is the easiest way to show you. So okay, so this is my text. You've got yours open. I want to start entering my tags. The steps I'm going to do for real in the video here, it makes sense to do the steps a little bit different than the way that they're laid out in the numbering system on the assignment page. So what I'm going to do right now before I enter the tags is I'm going to do the step where I save the file. I know that is kind of strange, but there's a reason for it. So what I want you to do when you save the file is it's going to be called something.txt. That just tells your computer that it's a plain text file, but I want you to save it as a .xml, which says it's an XML file, and I want you to put your name at the end, all together with capital letters but no spaces, right after you put an underscore. This way I can just keep track of everyone's contributions. So you keep the rest of the file name the same, right? But then you do underscore your name.xml. So I'm going to save this one, save as. I'm just going to put it where I had the previous one, and I'm going to backspace out that .txt. I'm going to do underscore my name, no spaces with capital letters, .xml, extensible markup language, save. So the reason that I really wanted to do that is now see at the bottom here, Sublime Text is like, okay, this is an XML file. It's no longer a plain text file, so I'm going to do like special highlighting, and I'm going to show tags with special colors and stuff. So for my example here, it's very simple. I only have the one level. A lot of you will be in this boat, so if that's your case, it's really easy to do this, okay? You do your opening pointy bracket. Some people call these carets, which you might enjoy. Looks a little bit like a carrot. End frame is our element. Level, attribute, equals. Attribute values go in quotation marks. A is the level that I'm working on there. Level A, aka first level narrative. If you don't know what that means, read the annotation guidelines, or the slides might help it, but the annotation guidelines are the best. Narrator, it's the first narrator that I've encountered, so I'm going to call it narrator 1. So I've got my element name, I've got my attribute, equal sign, attribute value in quotation marks, space, attribute name, equal sign, attribute value inside quotation marks. So I'm ready to close off my start tag. So you see, like once I do that, it's like, okay, it's recognizing that I'm done. It's not giving me weird colors anymore. It's seeing that I've done that properly. So that's what it should look like, okay? It's not terribly complicated. It needs to look like this. It needs to be, the spaces and the quotation marks all need to be perfect. And every single file that is out there is going to begin this way, because it's always going to begin with a level A, and it's always going to have narrator numbered 1 to begin with. I'm leaving the title out of this because it's not, I don't think we're in the narrative yet, right? The narrative starts here. So that's the start tag. So now I need to say, where does the level A narrative end? So for me, everything is in narrative level A. So I need to enclose everything between the start tag and the end tag. So the end tag is going to go right here at the very end. So I'm going to do my pointy bracket, also known as a caret, /, and in this case, Sublime Text is smart and it just fills in. It knows that I want to be closing off an end frame because it sees that I started one up here. So I would now hit save and I'm done. For this assignment, I'm done. So just for the purpose of argument, let's say that I did decide that this thing inside this passage that the doctor says is a frame narrative. So if I were going to do that, I would say it's level B because it's a story within a story. And I would say that the narrator here is the doctor and the narrator of this one is some omniscient narrator. So I would say it's a new narrator and I'd call it narrator number 2. This is the way to work, by the way. You go outside in. So I would start, even if I did believe that there was a B level, I'd start on the outside, get all that set up, and then I'd do the inside one. So I'd start with my A and then move on to my B's and then move on to any C's I might have and D's. But working that way. So here I want to mark all of this just hypothetically as being a narrative level B. So I would be, okay, right here. So I'm marking the start of that B level narrative, end frame, level equals B. It's actually completing things for me here, putting in quotation marks. Nar equals 2. So that's a proper start tag for this B-level narrative. Oh no, it's not that it inserted a quotation mark for it. It's me that I deleted a quotation mark that was in the story. This is an important point. Don't delete text. You could see it there, I almost deleted something from the story. Do not modify the story in any way. Don't alter the author's words. They should stay as they were. That's actually point 4 in your annotation guidelines. Okay. So that's where the B-level narrative begins, or where I'm pretending that it begins, and it ends here. So here, I want this tag to enclose all of this text, the entire B narrative. So I would go right here and do my caret, and then / end frame, it's completing it for me. And then I would click save. Now in this case, this is just an example. I don't actually believe that that's what it is, so I'm just going to close this because I'm not going to save it because I already saved it in its proper state. So I'm going to go back and reopen that file right here, and it all looks good, just one A-level narrative. Okay, so now we've done all of this. It's saved, we've named it appropriately, we've inserted our XML annotations, and we are finished with the technical part of the assignment. So then you just have to write your essay. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm giving you 3 things to respond to. Maybe give each one of them a paragraph or so. Include your box diagram. And then once you've got all this done, click onto the assignment page and you can actually submit it. So let's say that I'm attaching the XML file, the one that I changed. I'm not attaching the text file. That's just the plain one with no added tags. This is the one where I added my tags. So I'm going to attach that one. And then I'm going to also attach my essay. And I'm just pretending to have written an essay. This is just nothing in here. But for you, it will be in there. And make it sure it's like a Word doc or a PDF. And then I'm ready to submit. And I would click there. And that is all. So if you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to let me know. Hopefully, those of you who were in class, this should all be pretty easy. The hard part, the only hard part I think, was going to be this part, actually interpreting the story, but the technical setup should be pretty easy. Those of you who weren't in class, I think reading through the annotation guidelines carefully and watching this video should be enough for you to do this well. If it is not, come and talk to me during my office hours. And remember this rule, okay? I think this little rule I came up with is going to be very helpful for deciding whether or not to mark a boundary as a narrative frame. Can you imagine and then X started telling a story? All right,